What up, and greetings! Welcome to another Hearthstone card review. Welcome to episode 11, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats. We have another 7 cards from Whispers of the Old Gods. 3 of them have been revealed by big streamers. Some of my favorites like Noxious, Trump, and Scamas. The speed at which the cards are starting to come out alongside the show match that is on the 21st when they're meant to reveal a lot of the upcoming cards inclines that the expansion might actually be coming out towards the end of this month. Blizzard definitely wants to get it out as soon as possible because right now it's in a hiatus where people are not buying packs and sort of waiting with disenchanting and buying anything until all the changes are revealed. So it is a bad period for Hearthstone because a lot of people are not spending anything right now until the expansion hits, and they're gonna have a lot of gold saved up. But they also don't want to mess it up. Like, so far, every expansion and adventure had tremendous amount of lag, and it was just unplayable for the first 2 days. Essentially, at least on Europe. That's my experience. So they don't want to repeat the same situation again, which is fair enough. I hope they take their sweet time, rather take longer and let me open my 120 packs without having to reload the game about 80 times. That would be very nice. Without further ado, let's get into reviewing the cards. First card on our list, we have Noxious Reveal. Noxious? That's really weird. Anyways, Noxious card reveal is a new mage minion called Faceless Summoner. For 6 mana, the body is exactly the same of a Sylvanas or an Emperor, which have a 5/5 body, but a very strong effect. This one has got a quite powerful effect attached to it, because when it comes into play, it summons a random free cost minion. People look at it in a similar way to something like a Shredder or a piloted Sky Golem, but there's quite a bit of difference in between having the effect as a Battle Cry or a Death Rattle. Yes, this helps you in tempo play, but the Death Rattle, it was really great, or is really still at this very moment, because it provides a stickiness that is very hard to deal with area of effect spells and effects. This one will put, on average, a 2/4 or a 3/3 body on board. So in total, it's something over 8/8 in 6 mana, which is quite strong when you look at something like a Fel Reaver that is for 5 mana and 8/8, but it's got quite a bit of drawback. Yes, this one is split in 2 parts, and that allows the opponent to sort of trade better into it. It doesn't kill everything, because it's not a 8/8, but a 5/5 and a 3/3, so perhaps the 3/3 doesn't kill everything that kills it at that point. But in Arena, this card is gonna be like a must pick. This card is gonna be completely insane, because compare it to something like a Bodafist Ogre, it's just so much better than a Bodafist Ogre. It sort of would fit in a mage type of deck that I was playing in the very early beginning of my Hearthstone career, as a value mage, probably a mid-range type of mage that is now tempo mage. But it played water elementals and just really solid cards, like Harvest Golems at that point and cards like this. So this would fit in a deck like this. But some people say that it's like a mysterious challenger for mages card, and I don't really think it's that great if you look at it from the perspective of a Silver Hand Knight, which this sort of resembles. You've got a 5/5 instead of a 4/4 for 1 extra mana, and you get a free cost minion, which on average is likely to be a 3/3 instead of a 2/2 Squire. Is the value really that great? It's definitely no Shredder and no piloted Sky Golem, which is great because there shouldn't ever be anything like the Shredder coming out in Hearthstone ever again. But, I mean, in terms of Arena, I really see this card's potential. It's a common card, and it's gonna be, one of the strongest addition to Arena for mages. But in Constructed, it has some potential to be played, but I think that there are cards that are just stronger at the 6 mana slots. Like Thorson fits in most mage decks, probably better than this card. But I might be surprised. Faceless Summoner is definitely a really solid card, but it might be slightly overhyped. Second card of today is another one for mages. It is the card that Trump revealed to us. It's called Servant of Yogg-Saron. For 5 mana, we get a 5/4, and its battle cry casts a random spell that costs 5 or less, and its target is chosen randomly. So like Yogg-Saron, his servants cast crazy spells to random targets. This is essentially like a 4 mana 5/4, so the effect costs 1 extra on top. This does not count as casting a spell, so Mana Worm and Flamewaker and Archmage Antonidas won't benefit from this card. However, it is affected by spell damage, so if you have a spell damage minion on board and this plays a spell that damages something, whatever it is, it might be your face, it will benefit from your spell power. Now, Casino Mage is probably going like, whoop, whoop. No, but seriously, I do recommend watching Trump's reveal if you want the full breakdown of what this card might potentially do. But essentially, in about 25% of cases, it's something that's great for you. In about 25% cases, it's going to be something that's good for you. In about another 25% cases, it's going to be okay, have no effect, or be slightly bad for you. And in another 25% of cases, it's going to be really, really bad for you. So is this playable in Standard? I'm not really too hopeful when you compare it to something like an Ethereal Conjurer, where you discover a spell and you can choose whatever is suitable for you. Yeah, this plays a spell, but it can also, Soulfire this and discard a card, which loses you 2 cards for 5 mana and does nothing. That's completely terrible. Yes, fair enough, you can argue that something like a Deathlord, can screw you over and summon a Tyrion, and something like a Piloted Shredder can summon Doomsayer potentially and screw over your board. But I think the percentage of this happening is quite low, and those cards have their specific purposes, Deathlord against aggro, etc., that make them really great in those decks. But I don't really see a deck that this would be too great in, therefore I'm not too hopeful for this card in Standard. Yeah, I mean, it's tentacles everywhere. The third card that we're gonna discuss today is a new rogue epic minion. It's called Shadowcaster. For 5 mana, you get a 4/4 body. Not great, but the battle cry is quite amazing. You choose a friendly minion and you add a 1/1 copy to your hand that costs 1. So something of a Herald Volage effect that summons copies of 1/1 minions that are already on the board. This one doesn't summon them immediately, which can be a good or a bad thing. The bad thing is that it is quite costly and quite slow. Like I said, it's a 5 mana 4/4, so it'll cost you a lot of tempo, plus you might not exactly have a minion that you want to copy at that point. And you need to play something that you really want to copy, and it needs to really have a battle cry effect or death rattle effect that outweighs the fact that it's just a 1/1 and it's very likely to die on the next turn. The good thing is that you can keep it in hand until you're ready to play it, until the moment is right, and you can, copy an SI7 agent and deal that extra bit of damage. Rogue has got a couple of minions that remain in Standard that are gonna be quite strong if copied with this effect. Something like a Dark Iron Skulker. You already survive through the early game better because there's not gonna be so many Death Rattle sticky minions like there were in the past. And you can probably play your backstabs into your Fan of Knives and then play the Dark Iron Skulker that is gonna punish a lot of aggro minions. And then you just copy the Dark Iron Skulker to replay for 1, and your opponent doesn't really want to play anything if he's something like a Face Hunter or an aggro shaman, because he knows he's gonna lose everything that he puts on board for just 1 mana. And everyone seems to be dreaming about this working very, very well with a couple of neutral minions, with cards like Ragnaros, Malygos, Ratham, Nefarian. Reno could be actually quite cool, and Sylvanas. But these combinations are quite slow, and if you are keeping those minions on your board until your next turn, I guess that you're in quite a good position. So it's not a card that could overthrow the turn of the tides, unless you returned a card that can proper mess up your opponent and get you back from the game. But this has got a couple of cards that it could be absolutely broken with, like Coldlight Oracle and Bran. It's going to be completely disgusting, I think, in Milrogue when you have Bran on board and you play Cold Light and then you Shadowcaster the Cold Light and then your opponent concedes, lol. Fourth card is another minion for Hunters, this time for 3 mana. It's called Forlorn Stalker and it's a 4/2. Battlecry, it gives all your Death Rattle minion that you are holding in hand +1/+1. Another minion for Hunters that doesn't seem too great. Hunters so far got a couple of interesting minions, like the Giant Sandworm, but this doesn't really fall into the same category. The set line is quite bad, and the effect isn't great enough to justify it. +1/+1 on your minions might be worth quite a lot if you're holding, say 4 or 5, and you manage to play all of them, but Death Rattle minions, usually they're quite quick. And if they're slow, you're usually playing, 1 or 2, maybe like a Sylvanas and a Tyrion, and then nothing else. When Shredders are gonna go out, nothing else apart from that, really. And overpaying for this effect, which we've seen in a Mistcaller, has failed horribly, and Mistcaller buffed everything that was in your hand as well as in your deck. So I'm not too sure that this minion is worth what it costs. And often it's gonna buff 1 minion or no minion, and in that case it's totally terrible because it dies to something like an Abusive Sergeant or a 1/1 and a ping, and in that case the value is in the gutter. As we've seen, sometimes with dragon decks, there are situations when you're not holding another dragon or a dragon for your Wormness agent to trigger. So what gives you the certainty that you're going to be playing multiple Death Rattle minions? Plus, if you're playing Death Rattle minions, usually you want to play probably like all Death Rattle minions and then 1 or 2 cards that synergize with them. And I'm not too sure that this card synergizes well enough for it to be justified. And that's why I believe that this will be just another Metal Tooth Leaper. Trash tier. Next card on the list is called Demented Frostcaller, and it's another one of these mediocre to bad-ish cards. This time for Mages, it's a 4 mana 2/4, so quite a terrible stat line. And the effect is okay, it's not bad. It's actually probably better than a Flamewaker's, which this sort of resembles. Yes, it's 1 mana extra, but the freezing can potentially do more than 2 damage split randomly if it freezes a massive minion. The good thing is that Blizzard has confirmed that this won't try to refreeze the same character, so something like refreezing 1 minion 5 times out of 5 minions and the opponent's face won't happen. Bad news is that it says enemy character, so it can repeatedly freeze the opponent's face rather than one massive giant that he has on board at that point, which is really screwing you over for how much you're paying to get this minion in play. And sometimes you just run out of spells. You don't have limitless spells. Yeah, you can add more spells to your deck with cards like Ronin and Thorough Conjurer, but they have to be played from your hand. And essentially there's only a limited amount of spells and freezes that you can distribute. And because it's also a 50-50, if 1 minion is on board and you don't really want to freeze the opponent's face if he's not a weapon wielder, yeah, I don't know. This is not a great card, and that's all I'm gonna say. Actually, let me take that back. I'm just gonna say that the artwork is really cool, and I don't think that Demented is quite fair. I mean, you don't call a knife juggler Demented Juggler just when he misses. Maybe not so smart Frostcaller or cross-eyed Frostcaller. Demented is a bit harsh, isn't it? And we're getting into the last 2 cards on today's list, which are again getting to pretty good to really awesome category. The first one is a Noxious Reveal. It's called Shift in Shade, and for 4 mana you get a 4/3 with Death Rattle that puts a copy of a card from your opponent's deck and adds it to your hand. So somewhat like a half of a Thought Steal, that's what people call it. For overpaying slightly for the minion, you're getting that half of Thought Steal for 2 health essentially over something like a Yeti. And after the Museum Curator that came out in League of Explorers, we have another quite interesting draw mechanic for Priests. because Thought Steal in a lot of priest decks have been replaced because it was quite slow for what priest needed to play, and this is essentially, half of that effect, sort of similar how Undercity Huckster, which is the new card coming out for rogues, is half of a burgle. So priest steal cards directly from your opponent's deck, whereas rogues are a bit more noble and only steal from the class that you're playing, which is fair enough. I mean, this is probably better than drawing from your opponent's class because the range of cards is much greater, and not all the cards that are in that range are necessarily good enough to play in a competitive deck. This has a higher chance of drawing something like a Deadly Poison or a Blade Flurry. Usually, you're just gonna play this card, you're gonna get a bit of tempo, then it's gonna die, and you're gonna gain a card from that, which is a pretty good deal. I mean, it's not that much better than a Polluted Hoarder, which I said is not a usable card. That one life difference is actually quite a lot, and the difference in between 2 and 3 is quite significant in early game especially, and this is definitely not as good as Shredder, despite the fact that it has the same stat line and it gives you another card. Shredder plays that card at the same time, so the difference is right there, and this might just give you a whiff card, therefore Polluted Hoarder sometimes might be a bit more reliable. But there's always the surprise element of getting the card and your opponent not knowing which card of his it might be, and the card potentially screaming over in a way that he cannot imagine. Yeah, I think it's a decent card. I think it will be played, maybe not in all priest decks, but it's definitely a cool card, and I'm glad that it's going to priest. Next one, and the last card on today's list, is an amazing anti-aggro tool that Mage is getting. It's called Twilight Flamecaller, and for 3 mana you get a 2/2, but the Battle Cry deals 1 damage to all enemy minions, which is quite a good effect. You are getting Arcane Explosion for 1 mana, which is really good. If you compare it to something like a Dark Peddler, essentially you are drawing a Whirlwind that doesn't hit this guy for 1 mana at playing it. If you compare it to a Fan of Knives, that's really awesome because it's like drawing a card from Fan of Knives and the card is a 2/2 minion and being able to play it on the same turn. That is amazing. And I just think that this is a solid card. I mean, if aggro is relevant in the meta, this will be played and you will be mulliganing for this. If aggro shaman and face hunter are prominent with their 1-cost minions, this will be played. If stand against darkness in any combination with any other card is being played, this will be there to answer it. And Wisps of the Old Gods, Twilight Flamecaller is your new biggest enemy. You can pair it up with cards like Blizzard and Flame Strike to deal more damage to the entire board. 5 damage is a lot, and it usually will deal with almost anything. And you can just generally utilize it quite well in Mage because you can pair it up with a lot of effects and trade in with your minions to make the best potential value out of this card. And yeah, I think it's actually really decent. It's a decent Mage card for once out of the ones that we had. How many were Mage? 4 Mage cards? Mage cards! Incoming! And that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm gonna try to bring you one more video before the show match on the 21st because there's probably going to be a lot of cards coming out, if not all the remaining cards coming out on that day. So I'm going to have a lot of work, plus I'm going on holiday for a couple of days, but I'm going to try to record there and bring you more reviews. That being said, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more Hearthstone and other content coming out in the future. It was my pleasure to be able to bring you this review. Until I see you guys at the next video. Bye. Take care. I know you want it. I know you want it. And subscribe.